White Sleep Story. Have you ever heard of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from clouds, a queen sat at her palace window, which had an ebony black frame, stitching her husband's shirts. While she was thus engaged and looking out at the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell on the snow. Now the red looked so well upon the white that she thought to herself, "Oh, that I had a child as white as this snow, as red as this blood, and as black as the wood of this frame." Soon afterwards a little daughter came to her, who was as white as snow, and with cheeks as red as blood, and with her hair as black as ebony, and from this she was named Snow White. And at the same time, her mother died. About a year afterwards, the king married another wife, who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty that she could not bear anyone to be better looking than herself. She owned a wonderful mirror, and when she stepped before it and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" it replied, "The queen is the fairest of the day." Then she was pleased, for she knew that the mirror spoke truly. Little Snow White, however, grew up and became prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old, she was as fair as the noonday, and more beautiful than the queen herself. When the queen now asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" it replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday. Snow White is the fairest now, they say." This answer so angered the queen that she became quite yellow with envy. From that hour, whenever she saw Snow White, her heart was hardened against her, and she hated the little girl. Her envy and jealousy increased so that she had no rest day or night. And she said to a huntsman, "Take the child away into the forest. I will never look upon her again. You must kill her and bring me her heart and tongue for a token." The huntsman listened and took the maiden away. But when he drew out his knife to kill her, she began to cry, saying, "Ah, dear huntsman, give me my life. I will run into the wild forest and never come home again." This speech softened the hunter's heart, and her beauty so touched him that he had pity on her and said, "Well, run away then, poor child." But he thought to himself, "The wild beasts will soon devour you." Still, he felt as if a stone had been lifted from his heart, because her death was not by his hand. Just at that moment, a young boar came roaring along to the spot, and as soon as he clapped his eyes upon it, the huntsman caught it, and killing it, took its tongue and heart and carried them to the queen for a token of his deed. But now, poor little Snow White was left motherless and alone, and overcome with grief. She was bewildered at the sight of so many trees, and knew not which way to turn. She ran till her feet refused to go farther, and it was getting dark, and she saw a little house near. She entered in to rest. In this cottage, everything was very small, but very neat and elegant. In the middle stood a little table with a white cloth cover on it, and 7 little plates upon it, each plate having a spoon and a knife and a fork, and there was also 7 little mugs. Against the wall were 7 little beds arranged in a row, each covered with snow white sheets. Little Snow White, being both hungry and thirsty, ate a morsel of porridge out of each plate, and drank a drop or two of wine out of each mug, for she did not wish to take away the whole share of anyone. After that, because she was so tired, she laid herself down on one bed, but it did not suit. She tried another, but that was too long. A fourth was too short, a fifth too hard, but the seventh was just the thing, and tucking herself up in it, she went to sleep, first saying her prayers as usual. When it became quite dark, the owners of the cottage came home, 7 dwarfs, who dug for gold and silver in the mountains. They first lighted 7 little lamps, and saw at once, for they lit up the whole room, that somebody had been in, for everything was not in the order in which they had left it. The first asked, "Who has been sitting on my chair?" The second, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third said, "Who has been nibbling at my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been at my porridge?" The fifth, "Who has been meddling with my fork?" The sixth grumbled out, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh said, "Who has been drinking out of my mug?" Then the first, looking around, began again, "Who has been lying on my bed?" He asked, for he saw that the sheets were tumbled. At these words, the others came, and looking at their beds, cried out too, "Someone has been lying on our beds." But the seventh little man, running up to his, saw Snow White sleeping in it, so he called his companions, who shouted with wonder, and held up their 7 lamps, so that the light fell upon the little girl. "Oh heavens! Oh heavens!" said they. "What a beauty she is!" And they were so much delighted that they would not awaken her, but left her to sleep. And the 7th dwarf, in whose bed she was, slept with each of his fellows 1 hour, and so passed the night. As soon as morning dawned, Snow White awoke, and was quite frightened when she saw the 7 little men. But they were very friendly, and asked her what she was called. "My name is Snow White," was her reply. "Why have you come into our cottage?" they asked. Then she told them how her stepmother would have her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had wandered about the whole day until at last she had found their house. When her tale was finished, the dwarf said, "Will you look after our household, be our cook, make the beds, wash, sew, knit for us, and keep everything neat and in order? If so, we will keep you here, and you shall want for nothing." And Snow White answered, "Yes, with all my heart, I will." And so she remained with them and kept their house in order. In the morning, the dwarves went into the mountains and searched for silver and gold. And in the evening they came home and found their meals ready for them. During the day, the maiden was left alone, and therefore the good dwarves warned her and said, "Be careful of your stepmother, who will soon know of your being here, so let no one enter the cottage." The queen, meanwhile, supposing that she had eaten the heart and tongue of her stepdaughter, believed that she was now above all the most beautiful woman in the world. One day she stepped before her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And it replied, "The queen was the fairest yesterday. Snow White is fairest now, they say. The dwarfs protect her from the sway amid the forest far away." This reply surprised her, But she knew that the mirror spoke the truth. She knew, therefore, that the huntsman had deceived her, and that Snow White was still alive. So she dyed her face and clothed herself as a peddler woman, so that no one could recognize her, and in this disguise she went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door of the hut and called out, "Fine goods for sale, beautiful goods for sale." Snow White peeped out of the window and said, "Good day, my good woman. What have you to sell?" "Fine goods, beautiful goods," she replied. "Stays of all colors," and she held up a pair which were made of many-colored silks. "I may let in this honest woman," thought Snow White, and she unbolted the door and bargained for 1 pair of stays. "Can't think, my dear, how they become you," exclaimed the old woman. "Come, let me lace them up for you." Snow White suspected nothing and let her do as she wished, but the old woman laced her up so quickly and so tightly that all her breath went, and she fell down like one dead. "Now," thought the old woman to herself, hastening away, "now am I once more the most beautiful of all." At eventide, not long after she had left, the 7 dwarfs came home and were much frightened at seeing their dear little maid lying on the ground, and neither moving nor breathing, as if she were dead. They raised her up, and when they saw that she was laced too tight, they cut the stays to the pieces, and presently she began to breathe again. And little by little she revived. When the dwarfs now heard what had taken place, they said, "The old peddler woman was no other than your wicked stepmother. Take more care of yourself and let no one enter when we are not with you." Meanwhile, the queen had reached home, and going before her mirror, she repeated her usual words. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And it replied as before. The queen was the fairest yesterday. Snow White is the fairest now, they say. The dwarfs protect her from thy sway, amid the forest far away. As soon as it had finished, all her blood rushed to her heart, for she was so angry to hear that Snow White was yet living. "But now," thought she to herself, "will I make something which shall destroy her completely." Thus saying, she made a poisoned comb by arts which she understood, and then, disguising herself, she took the form of an old widow. She went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs, and knocking at the door, called out, "Good wares to sell today." Snow White peeped out and said, "You must go further, for I dare not let you in." "But still you may look," said the old woman, drawing out her poisoned comb and holding it up. The sight of this pleased the maiden so much that she allowed herself to be persuaded and opened the door. As soon as she had bought something, the old woman said, "Now, let me for once comb your hair properly," and Snow White consented. But scarcely was the comb drawn through the hair when the poison began to work, and the maiden fell down senseless. "You pattern of beauty," cried the wicked queen, "it is now all over with you." And so saying, she departed. Fortunately, evening soon came, and the 7 dwarfs returned, and as soon as they saw Snow White lying drew it out. Then the maiden very soon revived and told them all that had happened. So again, they warned her against the wicked stepmother and bade her open the door to nobody. Meanwhile, the queen, on her arrival home, had again consulted her mirror and received the same answer as twice before. This made her tremble and foam with rage and jealousy. She swore that Snow White should die if it cost her her own life. Thereupon she went into an inner secret chamber where no one could enter, and made an apple of the most deep and subtle poison. Outwardly, it looked nice enough to eat. It had rosy cheeks, which would make the mouth of everyone who looked at it water. But whoever ate the smallest piece of it would surely die. As soon as the apple was ready, the queen again dyed her face and clothed herself like a peasant's wife, and then over the 7 mountains to the house of the dwarves she made her way. She knocked at the door, and Snow White stretched out her head and said, "I dare not let anyone enter. The 7 dwarves have forbidden me." "That is hard on me," said the old woman, "for I must take back my apples. But there is one which I will give you." "No," answered Snow White. "No, I dare not take it." "What? Are you afraid of it?" cried the old woman. "There, see, I will cut the apple in halves. Do you eat the red cheeks, and I will eat the core." The apple was so artfully made that the red cheeks alone were poisoned. Snow White very much wished for the beautiful apple, and when she saw the old woman eating the core, she no longer resisted, but, stretching out her hand, took the poisoned part. Scarcely had she placed a piece in her mouth when she fell down dead upon the ground. Then the queen, looking at her with glittering eyes and laughing bitterly, exclaimed, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony. This time the dwarves cannot reawaken you." When she reached home and consulted her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" It answered, "The queen is the fairest of the day." Then her envious heart was at rest, as peacefully as an envious heart can rest. When the little dwarfs returned home in the evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground, and there appeared to be no life in her body. She seemed to be quite dead. They raised her up and tried if they could find anything poisonous. They unlaced her and even uncombed her hair and washed her with water and with wine, but nothing availed. The dear child was really and truly dead. Then they laid her upon a bier, and all 7 placed themselves around it, and wept for 3 days without ceasing. Then they prepared to bury her, but she looked still fresh and lifelike, and even her red cheeks had not deserted her. So they said to one another, "We cannot bury her in the black ground." Then they ordered a case to be made of glass. In this they could see the body on all sides, and the dwarves wrote her name with golden letters upon the glass, saying that she she was a king's daughter. Now they placed the glass case upon the ledge on a rock, and one of them always remained by it watching. Even the birds bewailed the loss of Snow White. First came an owl, then a raven, and last of all a dove. For a long time, Snow White lay peacefully in her case and changed not, but looked as if she were only asleep, for she was still white as snow, red as blood, and black-haired as ebony. By and by, it happened that a king's son was traveling in the forest and came to the dwarf's house to pass the night. He soon saw the glass case upon the rock and the beautiful maiden lying within, and he read also the golden inscription. When he had examined it, he said to the dwarves, "Let me have this case, and I will pay you what you like for it." But the dwarves replied, "We will not sell it for all the gold in the world." "Then give it to me," said the prince, "for I cannot live without Snow White. I will honor and protect her as long as I live." When the dwarves saw that he was so much in earnest, they pitied him, and at last gave him the case, and the prince ordered it to be carried away on the shoulders of his attendants. Presently it happened that they stumbled over a rut, and with the shock, the piece of poisoned apple which lay in Snow White's mouth fell out. Very soon she opened her eyes, and raising the lid of the glass case, she rose up and asked, "Where am I?" Full of joy, the prince answered, "You are safe with me." And he told her what she had suffered, and how he would rather have her than any other for his wife, and he asked her to accompany him to the castle of the king, his father. Snow White consented, and when they arrived there, they were married with great splendor and magnificence. Snow White's stepmother was also invited to the wedding, and when she was dressed in all her finery to go, she first stepped in front of her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And it replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday. The prince's bride is now, they say." At these words, the queen was in a fury, and was so terribly mortified that she knew not what to do with herself. At first, she resolved not to go to the wedding, but she could not resist the wish to see the princess, so she went. But as soon as she saw the bride, she recognized Snow White, and was so terrified with rage and astonishment that she rushed out of the castle, and was never heard of again. The end. Let me get another story for you. This one is called The Little Mermaid. Have you heard of it? Far out in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. So deep indeed that no cable could sound it, and many church steeples, piled one upon the other, would not reach from the ground beneath to surface of the water above. There dwell the Sea King and his subjects. We must not imagine that there is nothing at the bottom of the sea but bare yellow sand. No, indeed, for on this sand grow the strangest flowers and plants, the leaves and stems of which are so pliant, and the slightest agitation of the water causes them to stir as if they had life. Fishes, both large and small, glide between the branches as birds fly among the trees here upon the land. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as the water flows through them. Their appearance is very beautiful, for in each lies a glittering pearl, which would be fit for the diadem of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a very sensible woman, but exceedingly proud of her high birth, and on that account wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others of high rank were allowed to only wear 6. She was, however, deserving of a very great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her 6 granddaughters. They were beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But, like all the others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long, they played in the great halls of the castle, or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and the fish swam in, just as the swallows fly into our houses when we open up the windows. Only the fishes swam up to the princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. Outside the castle, there was a beautiful garden in which grew bright red and dark blue flowers and blossoms like flames of fire. The fruit glittered like gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro continually. The earth itself was the finest sand, but blue as the flame of burning sulfur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if the blue sky were everywhere. Above and below, instead of the dark depths of the sea, in calm weather, the sun could be seen, looking like a reddish-purple flower with light streaming from the calyx. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One arranged her flower bed in the form of a whale. Another preferred to make hers like the figure of a little mermaid, while the youngest child made hers round like the sun, and in it grew flowers as red as his rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful. While her sisters showed off delight at the wonderful things which they had obtained from the wrecks of vessels, she cared only for her pretty flowers, red like the sun, and a beautiful marble statue. It was the representation of a handsome boy, carved out of the pure white stone, which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. She planted by the statue a rose-colored weeping willow. It grew rapidly and soon hung its fresh branches over the statue, almost down to the blue sands. The shadows had the color of violet and waved to and fro like the branches, so that it seemed as if the crown of the tree and the root were at play, trying to kiss each other. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above, the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew of the ships and of the towns, the people, and the animals. To her it seemed most wonderful and beautiful to hear that the flowers of the land had fragrance, while those below the sea had none, that the trees of the forest were green, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly that it was a pure pleasure to listen to them. Her grandmother called the birds fishes, or the Little Mermaid would not have understood what it meant, for she had never seen birds. "When you have reached your 15th year," said the grandmother, "you will have permission to rise up out of the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships go sailing by. Then you will see both forests and towns." In the following year, one of the sisters would be 15, but as each was a year younger than the other, the youngest would have to wait 5 years before her turn came to rise up from the bottom of the ocean to see the earth as we do. However, each promised to tell the others what she saw on her first visit and what she thought was most beautiful. Their grandmother could not tell them enough. There were so many things about which they wanted to know. None of them longed so much for her turn to come as the youngest. She who had the longest time to wait, who was so quiet and thoughtful. Many nights she stood by the open window, looking up through the dark blue water and watching the fish as they splashed about with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and the stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming over her head or a ship full of human beings who had never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. At length, the eldest was 15 and was allowed to rise to the surface above the ocean. When she returned, she had hundreds of things to talk about, but the finest thing, she said, was to lie on a sandbank in the quiet moonlight sea near the shore, gazing at the lights of the nearby town that twinkled like hundreds of stars, and listening to the sounds of music, the noise of carriages, the voices of human beings, and the merry pealing of the bells in the church steeples. Because she could not go near all these wonderful things, she longed for them all the more. Oh, how eagerly did the younger sister listen to all these descriptions. And afterwards, when she stood at the open window looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of a great city with all its bustle and noise, and even fancied she could hear the sound of church bells down in the depths of the sea. In another year, the second sister received permission to rise to the surface of the water and to swim about where she pleased. She rose just as the sun was setting, and this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold and violet and rose-colored clouds, which she could not describe, drifted across it, and more swiftly than the clouds flew a large flock of wild swans towards the setting sun. But it sank into the waves, and the rosy tints faded from the clouds and from the sea. The third sister's turn followed, and she was the boldest of them all, where she swam up a broad river that emptied into the sea. On the banks, she saw green hills covered with beautiful vines, and palaces and castles peeping out from amid the proud trees of the forest. She heard birds singing and felt the rays of the sun so strongly that she was obliged often to dive under the water to cool her burning face. In a narrow creek, she found a large group of little human children, almost naked, sporting about in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they fled in great fright. And then a little black animal. It was a dog. But she did not know it, for she had never seen one before, came to the water and barked at her so furiously that she became frightened, rushed back to the open sea. But she said she should never forget the beautiful forest, the green hills, and the pretty children who could swim in the water, although they had no tails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the midst of the sea, but said it was quite as beautiful there as nearer the land. She could see many miles around her, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She had seen the ships, but at such a great distance that they looked like seagulls. The dolphins sported in the waves, and the great whales spouted water from their nostrils, till it seemed as if 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so when her turn came, she saw what the others had not seen the first time they went up. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating about, each like a pearl, she said, but larger and loftier than the churches built by men. They were of the most singular shapes and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest and let the wind play with her long hair. She noticed that all of the ships sailed past very rapidly, steering as far away as they could, as if they were afraid of the iceberg. Towards evening, as the sun went down, dark clouds covered the sky, the thunder rolled, and the flashes of lightning glowed red on the icebergs as they were tossed about by the heaving sea. On all the ships the sails were reefed with fear, trembling, while she sat on the floating iceberg, calmly watching the lightning as it darted its forked flashes into the sea. Each of the sisters, when first she had permission to rise to the surface, was delighted with the new and beautiful sights. Now that they were grown-up girls and could go where they pleased, they had become quite indifferent about it. They soon wished themselves back again, and after a month had passed, they said it was much more beautiful down below and pleasanter to be at home. Yet, often in the evening hours, the five sisters would twine their arms about each other and rise to the surface together. The voices were more charming than that of any human being, and before the approach of a storm, when they feared that a ship might be lost, they swam before the vessel, singing enchanted songs of delights to be found in the depths of the sea, and begging the voyagers not to fear if they sank to the bottom. But the sailors could not understand the song and thought it was the sighing of the storm. These things were never beautiful to them. For if the ship sank, the men were drowned. Their dead bodies alone reached the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters rose, arm in arm, through the water, their youngest sister would stand quite alone, looking after them, ready to cry. Only since mermaids have no tears, she suffered more acutely. "Oh, were I but 15 years old," said she, "I know that I shall love the world up there and all the people who live in it." At last she reached her 15th year. "Well, now you are grown up," said the old dowager, her grandmother. "Come and let me adorn you like your sisters." And she placed in her hair a wreath of white lilies, of which every flower leaf was half a pearl. Then the old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank. "But they hurt me so," said the little mermaid. "Yes, I know. Pride must suffer pain," replied the old lady. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her own garden would have suited her much better. But she could not change herself, so she said farewell and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set when she raised her head above the waves. The clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, and the air mild and fresh. A large ship with 3 masts lay becalmed on the water. Only one sail was set, for not a breeze stirred, and the sailors sat idle on deck or amidst the rigging. There was music and song on board, and as darkness came on, 100 colored lanterns were lighted as if the flags of all the nations waved in the air. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows, and now and then, as the waves lifted her up, she could look in through the glass window panes and see a number of gaily dressed people. Among them, and the most beautiful of all, was a young prince with large black eyes. He was 16 years of age, and his birthday was being celebrated with great display. The sailors were dancing on deck, and when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose in the sky, making it as bright as the day. The little mermaid was so startled that she dived underwater, and when she again stretched out her head, it looked as if all the stars of heaven were falling around her. She had never seen such fireworks before. Great suns spurted fire about. Splendid fireflies flew into the blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people, and even the smallest rope, could be seen distinctly. How handsome the young prince looked as he pressed the hands of all his guests and smiled at them, while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns had been extinguished. No more rockets rose in the air, and the cannon had ceased firing. But the sea became restless, and a moaning, grumbling sound could be heard beneath the waves. Still, the little mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down on the water so that she could look within. After a while, the sails were quickly set, and the ship went on her way. But the waves rose higher, heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more, the sails were furled, and the great ship pursued her flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose mountain high, as if they would overtop the mast, but the ship dived like a swan between them, then rose again on their lofty, foaming crests. To the little mermaid, this was pleasant sport, but not sailors. At length, the ship groaned and creaked. Thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea. As the waves broke over the deck, the mainmast snapped asunder like a reed, and as the ship lay over on her side, the water rushed in. The Little Mermaid now perceived that the crew were in danger. Even she was obliged to be careful to avoid the beams and planks of the wreck, which lay scattered on the water. At one moment, it was pitch dark, so that she could not see a single object. At one moment, it was pitch dark, so that she could not see a single object. But when a flash of lightning came, it revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board, except the prince. When the ship parted, she had seen him sink into the deep waves, and she was glad, for she thought he would now be with her. Then she remembered that human beings could not live in the water, so that when he got down to the father's palace, he would certainly be quite dead. No, he must not die. So she swam about among the beams and planks which strewed the surface of the sea, forgetting that they could crush her to pieces. Diving deep under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, she at length managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power to swim in that stormy sea. His limbs were failing him, his beautiful eyes were closed, and he would have died had not the Little Mermaid come to his assistance. She held his head above the water and let the waves carry them where they would. In the morning, the storm had ceased, but of the ship not a single fragment could be seen. The sun came up red and shining out of the water, and its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her little garden, so she kissed him again and wished that he might live. Presently, they came in sight of land, and she saw lofty blue mountains, on which the white snow rested as if a flock of swans were lying upon them. Beautiful green forests were near the shore. Presently, they came in sight of land, and she saw lofty blue mountains on which the white snow rested, as if a flock of swans were lying upon them. Beautiful green forests were near the shore, and close by stood a large building, whether a church or a convent, she couldn't tell. Orange and citron trees grew in the garden, and before the door stood lofty palms. The sea here formed a little bay, in which the water lay quiet and still, but very deep. She swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered with fine white sand, and there she laid him in the warm sunshine, taking care to raise his head higher than his body. The bells sounded in the large white building, and some young girls came into the garden. The Little Mermaid swam out farther from the shore and hid herself among some high rocks that rose out of the water, covering her head and neck with the foam of the sea. She watched there to see what would become of the poor prince. It was not long before she saw a young girl approach the spot where the prince lay. She seemed frightened at first, but mermaid saw that the prince came to life again and smiled upon those who stood about him. But to her he sent no smile. He knew not that she had saved him. This made her very sorrowful, and when she was led away into the great building, she dived down into the water and returned to her father's castle. She had always been silent and thoughtful, and now she was more so than ever. Her sisters asked her what she had seen during her first visit to the surface of the water, but she could tell them nothing. Many an evening and morning did she rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruits in the garden ripen and watched them gathered. She watched the snow on the mountain tops melt away, but never did she see the prince. And therefore she always returned home more sorrowful than before. It was her only comfort to sit in her own little garden and fling her arm around the beautiful marble statue, which was like the prince. She gave up attending her flowers, and as they grew in wild confusion over the paths, twining their long leaves and stems round the branches of the trees, so that the whole place became dark and gloomy. At length, she could bear it no longer and told one of her sisters all about it. Then the others heard the secret, and very soon it became known to several mermaids, one of whom had an intimate friend who happened to know about the prince. She had also seen the festival on board ship, and she told them where the prince came from and where his palace stood. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses. Then they entwined their arms and rose together to the surface of the water near the spot where they knew the prince's palace stood. It was built of bright yellow, shining stone, and had long flights of marble steps, one of which reached quite down to the sea. Splendid, gilded cupolas rose over the roof and between the pillars that surrounded the whole building stood lifelike statues of marble. Through the clear crystal of the lofty windows could be seen noble rooms with costly silk curtains and hangings of tapestry and walls covered with beautiful paintings. In the center of the largest salon, a fountain threw its sparkling jets high up into the glass cupola of the ceiling, through which the sun shone in upon the water and upon the beautiful plants that grew in the basin of the fountain. Now that the little mermaid knew where the prince lived, she spent many an evening and many a night on the water near the palace. She would swim much nearer the shore than any of the others had ventured, and once she would swim much nearer the shore than any of the others ventured, and once she went up the narrow channel under the marble balcony, which threw a broad shadow on the water. Here she sat and watched the young prince, who thought himself alone in the bright moonlight. She often saw him evenings, sailing in a beautiful boat, on which he music sounded and flags waved, she peeped out from among the green rushes, and if the wind caught her long, silvery white veil, those who saw it believed it to be a swan, spreading out its wings. Many a night, too, when the fishermen set their nets by light of their torches, she heard them relate many good things about the young prince, and this made her heart glad that she had saved his life when he was tossed about, half dead on the waves. She remembered how his head had rested on her bosom, and how heartily she had kissed him. But he knew nothing of all this, and could not even dream of her. She grew more and more to like human beings, and wished more and more to be able to wander about with those whose worlds seemed to be so much larger than her own. They could fly over the sea in ships and mount the high hills which were far above the clouds, and the lands they possessed, their woods and their fields, stretched far away beyond the reach of their sight. There was so much that she wished to know, but her sisters were unable to answer all her questions. She then went to her old grandmother, who knew all about the upper world, which she rightly called the lands above the sea. If human beings are not drowned, asked the Little Mermaid, can they live forever? Do they never die, as we do here in the sea? Yes, replied the old lady. They must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live for 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we become only foam on the surface of the water, and have not even a grave among those we love. We have not immortal souls. We shall never live again, like the green seaweed. When once it has been cut off, we can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have souls which live forever, even after the body has been turned to dust. They rise up through the clear, pure air, beyond the glittering stars, as we rise out of the water and behold all the land of the earth. So do they rise to unknown and glorious regions, which we shall never see. Why have not we immortal souls? Asked the Little Mermaid mournfully. I would gladly give all the hundreds of years that I have to live to be a human being, only for one day to have the hope of knowing the happiness of that glorious world above the stars. You must not think like that, said the old woman. We believe that we are much happier and much better off than the human beings. So I shall die, said the Little Mermaid, and as the foam of the sea, I shall be driven out, never again to hear the music of the waves, or to see the pretty flowers, or the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul? No, said the old woman, unless a man should love you so much that you are more to him than his father or his mother, and if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain a share in the would give to you a soul and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which among us is considered so beautiful, on earth is thought to be quite ugly. They do not know any better, and they think it is necessary, in order to be handsome, to have 2 stout props, which they call eggs. Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. "Let us be happy," said the old lady, "and dart and spring about during the 300 years that we have to live, which is really quite long enough. After that, we can rest ourselves all the better. This evening, we are going to have a court ball." It was one of those splendid sights which we can never see on earth. The walls and the ceiling of the large ballroom were made of thick but transparent crystal, many hundreds of colossal shells, some of deep red, others of grass green, with blue fire in them, stood in rows on each side. These lighted up the whole salon and shone through the walls, so that the sea was also illuminated. Innumerable fishes, great and small, swam past the crystal walls. On some of them the scales glowed with a purple brilliance, and on others shone like silver and gold. Through the halls flowed a broad stream, and in it danced the mermen and the mermaids to the music of their own sweet singing. No one on earth had such lovely voices as they, but the little mermaid sang more sweetly than all. The whole court applauded her with hands and tails, and for a moment her heart felt quite gay, for she knew she had the sweetest voice either on earth or in sea. But soon she thought again of the world above her. She could not forget the charming prince, nor her sorrow that she had not an immortal soul like his. She crept away silently out of her father's palace, and while everything within was gladness and song, she sat in her own little garden, sorrowful and alone. Then she heard the bugle sound through the water and thought, "He is certainly sailing above. He in whom I wish is center, and whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. He is certainly sailing above. He in whom I wish is center, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I will venture all for him, and to win an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go out to the sea witch, of whom I have always been so much afraid. She can give me counsel and help." Then the little mermaid went out from her garden and took the road to the foaming whirlpools, behind which the sorceress lived. She had never been that way before. Neither flowers nor grass grew there. Nothing but bare, gray, sandy ground stretched out to the whirlpool, where the water, like foaming mill wheels, seized everything that came within its reach and cast it into fathomless deep. obliged to pass before she could reach the dominions of the sea witch. Then, for a long distance, the road lay across a stretch of warm, bubbling mire, called by the witch her turf moor. Beyond this was the witch's house, which stood in the center of a strange forest, where all the trees and flowers were polypi, half animals and half plants. They looked like serpents, with 100 heads growing out of the ground. The branches were long, slimy arms with fingers like flexible worms, moving limb after limb from the root to the top. All that could be reached in the sea they seized upon and held fast, so that it never escaped from their clutches. The little mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still, and her heart beat with fear. She came very near turning back, but she thought of the prince and of the human soul for which she longed, and her courage returned. She fastened her long, flowing hair around her head so that the polypi should not lay hold of it. She crossed her hands on her bosom and then darted forward as a fish shoots through the water between the supple arms and fingers of the ugly polypi, which were stretched out on each side of her. She saw that they all held in their grasp something she had seized with their numerous little arms, which were as strong as iron bands. Tightly grasped in their clean arms were white skeletons of human beings who had perished at sea and had sunk down into the deep waters. Skeletons of land animals, and oars, rudders, and chests of ships. There was even a little mermaid, whom they had caught and strangled, and this seemed the most shocking of all to the little princess. She now came to a space of marshy ground in the wood, where large, fat water snakes were rolling in the mire and showing their ugly, drab-colored bodies. In the midst of the spot stood a house built of the bones of shipwrecked human beings. There sat the sea witch, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with pieces of sugar. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens and allowed them to crawl all over her bosom. "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It's very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, though it will bring you to sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and to have 2 supports instead, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, so that you may have an immortal soul." And then the witch laughed so loud and so disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and lay there, wriggling. "You are but just in time," said the witch, "for after sunrise tomorrow, I should not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a draft for you, with which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise. Seat yourself there and drink it. Your tail will then disappear and shrink up into what men call legs." You will feel great pain, as if a sword were passing through you, but all who you see will say that you are the prettiest little human being they ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. Every step you take, however, will be as if you were treading upon sharp knives, and as if the blood must flow. If you will bear all this, I will help you. Yes, I will, said the little princess in a trembling voice, as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. But think again, said the witch, for once your shape has become like a human being, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return through the water to your sisters or to your father's palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, so that he is willing to forget his mother and his father for your sake, and to love you with his whole soul, and to allow the priest to join your hands that you may be man and wife, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waves. I will do it, said the little mermaid, and she became pale as death. But I must be paid also, said the witch, and it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with it. But this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess will I have as the price of my costly draft, which must be mixed with my own blood, so that it may be as sharp as a two-edged sword. But if you take away my voice, said the little mermaid, what is left for me? Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, and your expressive eyes. Surely with these you can enchant a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue, that I may cut it off as my payment. Then you shall have the powerful draft. It shall be, said the little mermaid. Then the witch placed her cauldron upon the fire to prepare the magic draught. Cleanliness is a good thing, said she, scouring the vessel with snakes, which she had tied together in a large knot. Then she pricked herself in the breast and let the black blood drop into the cauldron. The steam that rose twisted itself into such horrible shapes that no one could look at them without fear. Every moment, the witch threw a new ingredient into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. There it is for you, said the witch. Then she cut off the mermaid's tongue so that she would never again speak or sing if the lullaby should seize you as you return through the wood," said the witch. "Throw over them a few drops of the potion and their fingers will be torn to 1,000 pieces." But the Little Mermaid had no occasion to do this, for the polypi sprang back in terror when they caught sight of the glittering draught which shone in her hand like a twinkling star. So she passed quickly through the wood and the marsh, and between the rushing whirlpools she saw that in her father's palace the torches in the ballroom were extinguished, and that all within were fast asleep. But she did not venture to go into them, for now that she was dumb and going to leave them forever, she felt as if her heart would break. She stole into the garden, took a flower from the flower bed of each of her sisters, kissed her hand towards the palace 1,000 times, and then rose up through the dark blue waters. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace and approached the beautiful marble steps, but the moon shone clear and bright. Then the Little Mermaid drank the magic draught, and it seemed as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body. She fell into a swoon and lay like one dead. When the sun rose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt a sharp pain, but before her stood the young, handsome prince. He fixed his coal black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own, and then became aware that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had a pretty pair of white legs and tiny feet, as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, so she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. The prince asked her who she was and whence she came. She looked at him mildly and sorrowfully with her deep blue eyes, could not speak. He took her by the hand and led her to the palace. Every step she took was as the witch had said it would be. She felt as if she were treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives. She bore it willingly, however, and moved at the prince's side as lightly as a bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful swaying movements. She was very soon arrayed in costly robes of silk and muslin, and was the most beautiful creature in the palace. But she was dumb and could neither speak nor sing. Beautiful female servants, dressed in silk and gold, stepped forward and sang before the prince and his royal parents. One sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. This was a great sorrow to the Little Mermaid, for she knew how much more sweetly she herself once could sing, and she thought, "Oh, if he could only know that I have given away my voice forever to be with him." The servants next performed some pretty, fairy-like dances to the sound of beautiful music. Then the Little Mermaid raised her lovely white arms, stood on the tips of her toes, glided over the floor, and danced as no one had yet been able to dance. At each moment her beauty was more revealed, and her expressive eyes his little foundling. She danced again quite readily to please him, though each time her foot touched the floor, it seemed as if she trod on sharp knives. The prince said she should remain with him always, and she was given permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had a page's dress made for her that she might accompany him on horseback. They rode together through the sweet, scented woods where the green boughs touched their shoulders and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed with him to the tops of high mountains, and although her tender feet bled, so that even her steps were marked, she only smiled, and followed him till they could see the clouds beneath them, like a flock of birds flying to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe in them in the cold sea water. It was then that she thought of all those below in the deep. Once, during the night, her sisters came up arm in arm, singing sorrowfully as they floated on the water. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her and told her how she had grieved them, and after that they came to the same place every night. Once, she saw in the distance her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old sea king, her father, with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands toward her, but did not venture so near the land as her sisters had. As the days passed, she loved the prince more dearly, and he loved her as one would love a little child. The thought never came to him to make her his wife, yet, unless he married her, she could not receive an immortal soul. And on the morning after his marriage with another, she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. Do you not love me the best of them all? The eyes of the Little Mermaid seemed to say when he took her in his arms and kissed her forehead. Yes, you are dear to me, said the prince. For you have the best heart, and you are the most devoted to me. You are like a young maiden whom I once saw, but whom I shall never meet again. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a holy temple where several young maidens performed the service. The youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I saw her but twice, and she is the only one in the world whom I could love, but you are like her, and you have almost driven her image from my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and good fortune has sent you to me in her stead. We will never part. Ah, he knows not that it was I who saved his life, thought the Little Mermaid. I carried him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat beneath the foam and watched till the human beings came to help him. I saw the pretty maiden that he loves better than he loves me. The mermaid sighed deeply, but she could not weep. He says the maiden belongs to the holy temple, for she will never return to the world. They will meet no more. I am by his side. I see him every day. I will take care of him and love him and give up my life for his sake. Very soon it was said that the prince was to marry and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife. For a fine ship was being fitted out, although the prince gave out that he intended merely to pay a visit to the king. It was generally supposed that he went to court the princess. A great company were to go with him. The little mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. I must travel, he said to her. I must see the beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her, because she is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would choose you. My dumb foundling, with those expressive eyes. Then he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long waving hair, and laid his head on her heart while she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. You're not afraid of the sea, are you? He said, as they stood on the deck of the noble ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. Then he told her of storm and of calm and of strange fishes in the deep beneath them and what the divers had seen there. She smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. In the moonlight night, when all on board were asleep, except the man at the helm, she sat on deck, gazing down through the clear water. She thought she could distinguish her father's castle, and upon it her aged grandmother, with the silver crown on her head, looking through the rushing tide at the keel of the vessel. Then her sisters came upon the waves and gazed at her mournfully, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them and smiled and wanted to tell them how happy and well off she was. But the cabin boy approached, and when her sisters dived down, he thought what he saw was only the foam of the sea. The next morning, the ship sailed into the harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king, whom the prince was going to visit. The church bells were ringing, and from the high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets. Soldiers with flying colors and glittering bayonets lined the roads through which they passed. The next morning, the ship sailed into the harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king, whom the prince was going to visit. The church bells were ringing, and from the high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets. Soldiers with flying colors and glittering bayonets lined the roads through which they passed. Every day was a festival, balls and entertainments following one another, but the princess had not yet appeared. People said that she had been brought up and educated in a religious house where she was learning every royal virtue. At last she came. Then the little mermaid was anxious to see whether she was really very beautiful, was obliged to admit that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long, dark eyelashes, her laughing, blue eyes shone with truth, purity. "It was you," said the prince, "who saved my life when I lay as if dead on the beach." And he folded his blushing bride into his arms. "Oh, I am too happy," said he to the Little Mermaid. "My fondest hopes are now fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere." The Little Mermaid kissed his hand and felt as if her heart were already broken. His wedding morning would bring death to her, and she would change into the foam of the sea. All the church bells rang, and heralds rose through the town proclaiming the betrothal. Perfumed oil was burned in costly silver lamps on every altar. The priests waved the censers, while the bride and the bridegroom joined their hands and received the blessing of the bishop. The Little Mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, held up the bride's train, but her ears heard nothing of the festive music, and her eyes saw not the holy ceremony. She thought of the night of death which was coming to her, and of all she had lost in the world. On the same evening, the bride and the bridegroom went on board the ship. Cannons were roaring, flags waving, and in the center of the ship, a costly tent of purple and gold had been erected. It contained elegant sleeping couches for the bridal pair during the night. The ship, under a favorable wind, with swelling sails, gilded away smoothly and lightly over the calm sea. When it grew dark, a number of colored lamps were lighted, and the sailors danced merrily on deck. The Little Mermaid could not help thinking of her first rising out of the sea, when she had seen similar joyful festivities. So she too joined in the dance, poised herself in the air as a swallow when he pursues his prey, and all present cheered her wonderingly. She had never danced so gracefully before. Her tender feet felt as if cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for the pain. A sharper pang had pierced her heart. She knew this was the last evening she should ever see the prince, for whom she had forsaken her kindred and her home. She had given up her beautiful voice and suffered unheard of pain daily for him, while he knew nothing of it. This was the last evening that she should breathe the same air with him, or gaze on the starry sky and the deep blue sea. An eternal night, without a thought or a dream, awaited her. She had no soul, and now could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on the ship until long after midnight. She smiled and danced with the rest, while the thought of death was in her heart. The prince kissed his beautiful bride. She played with his raven hair till they went arm in arm to rest in the sumptuous tent. Then all became still on board. The ship and only the pilot who stood at the helm was awake. The Little Mermaid leaned her white arms on the edge of the vessel and looked towards the east for the first blush of the morning, for that first ray of dawn, which was to be her death. She saw her sisters rising out of the flood. They were pale as she, but their beautiful hair no longer waved in the wind. It had been cut off. "We have given our hair to the witch," said they, "to obtain help for you, that you may not die tonight. She has given us a knife. See, it's very sharp. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the heart of the prince. When the warm blood falls upon your feet, they will grow together again into a fish's tail, and you will once more be a mermaid and can return to us to live out your 300 years before you are changed into the salt of the sea foam. Haste, then. Either he or you must die before sunrise. Our old grandmother mourns for you that her white hair is falling, as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Hasten. Do you not see the first streaks of the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise, and you must die." Then they sighed deeply and mournfully, and sank beneath the waves. The Little Mermaid drew back the crimson curtain of the tent and beheld the fair bride, whose head was resting on the prince's breast. She bent down and kissed his noble brow, then looked at the sky, on which the rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. She glanced at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in his dreams. She was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hand of the Little Mermaid. But she flung it far from her into the waves. The water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. She cast one more lingering, half-fainted glance at the prince, then threw herself from the ship into the sea and felt her body dissolving into the foam. Okay, so I'm like extremely disturbed. Like, the prince has to marry Ariel. You guys, I don't know how he can't see through it. Like, Ariel saved him. Ariel nursed him back to health. This is Ariel's man. Oh, we need to get our man. Let's go get our man. We have to get the prince. We have to get the prince. The sun rose above the waves, and his warm rays fell on the cold foam of the Little Mermaid, who did not feel as if she were dying. She saw the bright sun and hundreds of transparent, beautiful creatures floating around her. She could see through them the white sails of ships and the red clouds in the sky. Their speech was melodious, but could not be heard by mortal ears, just as their bodies could not be seen by mortal eyes. The Little Mermaid perceived that she had a body like theirs, and she continued to rise higher and higher out of the foam. "Where am I?" asked she, and her voice sounded ethereal, like the voices of those who were with her. No earthly music could imitate it. Among the daughters of answered one of them. A mermaid is not an immortal soul, nor can she obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the will of another hangs her eternal destiny, but the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can, by their good deeds, procure one for themselves. We fly to warm countries and cool the sultry air that destroys mankind with the pestilence. We carry the perfume of the flowers to spread health and restoration. After we have striven for 300 years to do all the good in our power, we receive an immortal soul and take part in the happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do as we are doing. You have suffered and endured and raised yourself to the spirit world by your good deeds, and now, by striving for 300 years in the same way, you may obtain an immortal soul. The little mermaid lifted her glorified eyes towards the sun, and for the first time felt them filling with tears. On the ship in which she had left the prince, there were life and noise, and she saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. Sorrowfully, they gazed at the pearly foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. The little mermaid lifted her glorified eyes toward the sun, and, for the first time, felt them filling with tears. On the ship which she had left the prince, there were life and noise, and she saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. Sorrowfully they gazed at the pearly foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of the bride and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud that floated above. After 300 years, thus we float into the kingdom of heaven, said she, and we may even get there sooner, whispered one of her companions. Unseen, we can enter the houses of men, where there are children, and for every day on which we find a good child, that is the joy of his parents and deserves their love. Our time of probation is shortened. The child does not know when we fly through the room, and we smile with joy at his good conduct. For we count 1 year less of our 300 years, but when we see a naughty or wicked child, we shed tears of sorrow, for every tear a day is added to our time of trial. Okay, so guys, that is the end. No. No. What? Guys, seriously, that was the end of Little Mermaid. I feel like so upset she didn't get the man. That evil bitch of a witch got the man. What the hell is going on? And the whole thing was about, we must be don't be naughty children. Fuck. I quit. This is stupid. I hate this. Fucking that bitch stole my voice. Got the prince to marry. No. Got the prince to marry her. No. I hate this. I quit. Seriously quitting. The story makes me feel fucking upset. That's like I almost feel like we should maybe read another story that's not as shitty, because this one is pretty fucking shitty. This is the worst.
feel upset. We didn't get the prince. The evil fucking sea witch stole that bitch. And like now I'm just like a sea maiden. Whatever. I'm gonna get a man. Let's go read another story. No, she did. She stole my prince. I wanted my prince. Let's go like evil queen. Like I want a story that will like silence all evil queens. I'm feeling like an evil queen. I have a whole website of stories. Like it goes deeper. She didn't get the man. The other woman did, and I saved him. I saved Eric. I nursed him to health. I didn't let the crashing waves. Okay, well, fuck this shit. I'm gonna get my man. The wolf and the 7 little kids. We're gonna read more stories. The 12 dancing princesses. Too much competition. No thanks. Ali Baba and the 40 thieves. Next time. Hansel and Gretel. Yes. 1,000 times yes. I can't believe my view count. That's like really tripping me out. The 3 billy goats. Snow White and Rose Red, the Snow Queen. That's me. Like I want Beauty and the Beast. Oops, I clicked it. Oh my gosh, it looks so pretty. I'm just gonna like show you guys like really quickly. Do you guys see that? That beautiful picture? That's freaking gorgeous. Damn. I really like that. Beauty and the Beast. This is a vintage fairy tale. Guys, we're going here tonight. Vintage fairy tale. I don't know how far I can read this, but I just want to get started because I know how this one ends. Fuck you, Little Mermaid. That ended horribly. I can't believe that bitch stole him, but like this one, I know how it ends. I know how this one ends. Let's do it. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a rich merchant. They lived in a very fine house in a beautiful city and had many servants in grand liveries to wait upon them. All their food was served in gold and silver dishes, and their gowns were made of the richest stuff, sewn with jewels. The 2 eldest were called Marigold and Dresselinda. Never a day passed but these 2 went out to some feast or junketing. But the Beauty, the youngest, loved to stay at home and keep her old father company. Now, it happened that misfortune came upon the merchant. Ships of his which were sailing the high seas, laden with merchandise of great price, were wrecked, and in one day he found that he was no longer the richest merchant in the city, but a very poor man. There was still left to him a little house in the country, and to this, when everything else had been sold, he retired. His 3 daughters, of course, went with him. Marigold and Dresselinda were very cross to think that they had lost all their money, and after being so rich and sought after, they must now live in a miserable cottage. But Beauty's only thought was to cheer her old father, and while her 2 sisters sat on wooden chairs and cried and bewailed themselves, Beauty lightened the fire and got the supper ready. for the merchant was now so poor that he could not even keep but one servant. And so it went on. The two elder sisters would do nothing but sulk in corners, while Beauty swept the floors, washed the dishes, and did her best to make the poor cottage pleasant. They led their sister a dreadful life, too, with their complaints, for not only did they refuse to do anything themselves, but they said that everything she did was wrong. Beauty bore all their unkindness patiently for her father's sake. In this way, a whole year went by, and then one day, a letter came for the merchant. Thank you, Obstinate. Don't make me cry. If you do, I do have tissues. Thank you. You guys are so nice. You don't know how many people I told about this stream and that I was gonna succeed. Thank you so much. You guys are actually so nice to me. In this way, a whole year went by. And then, one day, a letter came for the merchant. He hastened to find his daughters, for he was anxious to tell them the good news that was contained in the letter. My dear children, he said, at last our luck was turned. This letter says that one of the ships supposed to have been lost has come safely to port. And if that be so, we need no longer live in poverty. We shall not be so rich as before, but we shall have enough to keep us in comfort. Get me my traveling cloak, Beauty. I will set out at once to claim my ship. And now, tell me, girls, what shall I bring when I come back? 100 pounds, said Marigold, without hesitating an instant. I want a new silk dress, an apple green one, sewn with seed pearls and green shoes with red heels, and a necklace of emeralds and a box of gloves. And what shall I bring for you, my beauty? Asked her father, as his little daughter helped him to put on his traveling cloak. Oh, bring me a rose, said Beauty hastily. Her father kissed her fondly and set out. You silly girl, said Marigold. You just want her father to think you are more unselfish than we are. That's what you want, a rose indeed. Indeed, sister, said Beauty. That was not the reason. I thought our father would have enough to do in seeing to the safety of his ship without being troubled to do shopping for me. But the sisters were very much offended and went off to sit on their own room to talk of the fine things that they would have when their father came back. The merchant went his way to the city full of hope and great plans as to what he would do with his money. But when he got there, he found someone had played a trick on him, and no ship of his had come into harbor, so he was just as badly off as before. He spent the whole day looking about to make sure there was no truth in the letter he received. Just beginning to get dusk when he started out with a sad heart to make the journey home again. He was tired and miserable, and he had tasted no food since he left home in the morning. It was quite dark by by the time he came to the great wood, through which he had to pass to get to his cottage, and when he saw a light shining through the trees, he decided not to go to his home that night, but to make his way towards the light in the wood and ask for food and shelter. He expected to find a woodcutter's cottage, but what was his surprise as he drew near to the light to find that it came from the windows of a large and beautiful palace. He knocked at the gates, but no one answered, and presently, driven by hunger and cold, he made bold to enter and mounted the marble steps into the great hall. All the way, he never saw a soul. There was a big fire in the hall, and when he had warmed himself, he set out to look for the master of the house. But he did not look far, for behind the first door he opened was a cozy little room with supper set for one, a supper the mere look of which made you hungry and your mouth water. So the merchant sat down as bold as you please and made a very hearty supper, after which he again thought he would look for the master of the house. He started off and opened another door, and there he saw a bed merely to look at, which made you sleepy, and said to himself, "This is some fairy's work. I had better not look any farther for the master of the house." And with that, he tumbled into bed, and being very tired, he went to sleep at once and slept like a top till it was time to get up in the morning. When he awoke, he was quite surprised to find himself in such a soft and comfortable bed, but presently he remembered all that had happened to him. "I must be going," he said to himself, "but I wish I could thank my host for my good rest and my good supper." When he got out of bed, he found he had something else to be grateful for on the chair by his bedside lay a fine suit of new clothes, marked with his name, and with 10 gold pieces in every pocket. He felt quite a different man when he had put on the suit of blue and silver and jingled the gold and pieces of money in his pockets. When he went downstairs, he found a good breakfast waiting for him in the little room where he had supped the night before. And when he had made a good meal, he thought he would go stroll in the garden. Down the marble steps he went, and when he came to the garden, he saw it was full of roses, red and white, pink and yellow, and the merchant looked at them and remembered Beauty's wish. "Oh, my poor daughters," he said, "what a disappointment it will be to them to know that my ship has not come home after all. But But Beauty, at any rate, can have what she wanted. So he stretched out his hand and plucked the biggest, reddest rose within his reach. As the stalk snapped in his fingers, he started back in terror, for he heard an angry roar, and the next minute, a dreadful beast sprang upon him. It was taller than any man, and uglier than any animal. But what seemed most dreadful of all to the merchant, it spoke to him with a man's voice, after it had roared with him at the beast's voice. "Ungrateful wretch," said the beast, "have I not fed you, lodged you, and clothed you, and now you must repay my hospitality by stealing the only thing I care for, my roses." "Mercy, mercy," cried the merchant. "No," said the beast, "you must die." The poor merchant fell upon his knees and tried to think of something to say to soften the heart of the cruel beast, and at last he said, "Sir, I only stole this rose because my youngest daughter asked me to bring her one. I did not think, after all you have given me, that you would grudge me a flower." "Tell me about this daughter of yours," said the beast suddenly. "Is she a good girl?" "The best and the dearest in the world," said the old merchant, and then he began to weep. To think that he must die and leave his Beauty alone in the world, with no one to be kind to her. "Oh," he cried, "what will my poor children do without me?" "You should have thought of that before you stole the rose," said the beast. "However, if one of your daughters loves you well enough to suffer instead of you, she may. Go back and tell them what has happened to you, but you must give me your promise that either you or one of your daughters shall be at my palace door in 3 months' time from today." The wretched man promised. At any rate, he thought, I shall have 3 months more of life. Then the beast said, "I will not let you go empty-handed." So the merchant followed him back into the palace. There, on the floor of the hall, lay a great and beautiful chest wrought of silver. "Fill this with any treasures that take your fancy," said the beast. And the merchant filled it up with the precious things from the beast's treasure house. "I will send it home for you," said the beast, shutting down the lid. And so, with a heavy heart, the merchant went away. But as he went through the palace gate, the beast called to him that he had forgotten Beauty's realms, and at the same time held out to him a large bunch of the very best. The merchant put these into Beauty's hand, and when she ran to meet him at the door of their cottage, "Take them, my child," he said, "and cherish them, for they have cost your poor father his life." And with that, he sat down and told them the whole story. The 2 elder sisters wept and wailed blamed Beauty for all that had happened.
If it had not been for your wanting a rose, our father would have left the palace in safety with his new suit and his gold pieces.
But your foolishness has cost him his life. No, said Beauty. It is my life that shall be sacrificed. For when the 3 months are over, I shall go to the beast, and he may kill me, if he will, but he shall never hurt my dear father. The father tried hard to persuade her not to go, but she had made up her mind, and at the end of the 3 months, she set out for the beast's palace. Her father went with her to show her the way. As before, he saw the lights shining through the wood, knocked and rang in vain. At the great gate, warmed himself at the fire in the big hall, and had found the little room with the supper on the table that made you hungry to look at. Only this time, the table was laid for 2.
Come, father dear,
said Beauty. Take comfort. I do not think the beast means to kill me, or surely he would not have given me such a good supper. But the next moment, the beast came into the room. Beauty screamed and clung to her father. Don't be frightened, said the beast gently, but tell me, do you come here of your own free will? Yes, said Beauty, trembling. You are a good girl, said the beast. And then, turning to the old man, he told him that he might sleep there for that night, but in the morning he must go and leave his daughter behind him. They went to bed and slept soundly, and the next morning the father departed, weeping bitterly. Beauty, left alone, tried not to feel frightened. She ran here and there through the palace and found it more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined. The most beautiful set of rooms in the palace had written over the doors, Beauty's rooms, and in them she found books and music, canary birds and Persian cats, everything that could be thought of to make the time pass pleasantly. Oh dear, she said, if only I could see my poor father, I should be almost happy. As she spoke, she happened to look at the big mirror, and in it she saw the form of her father reflected, just riding up to the door of his cottage. That night, when Beauty sat down to supper, the beast came in. May I have supper with you? Said he.
That must be as you please, said Beauty.
So the beast sat down to supper with her, and when it was finished, he said, I am very ugly, Beauty, and I am very stupid, but I love you. Will you marry me? Okay, let's pretend he said something romantic. As she spoke, she happened to look up at the big mirror, and in it, she saw the form of her father reflected, just riding up to the door of his cottage. That night, when Beauty sat down to supper, the beast came in.
No, beast, said Beauty gently.
The poor beast sighed
same thing happened. He ate his supper with her and then asked her if she would marry him. And she always said no, beast. All this time, she waited on by invisible hands as though she had been a queen. Beautiful music came to her ears without her being able to see the musicians, but the magic looking glass was best of all, for in it she could see whatever she wished. As the days went by, and her slightest wish was granted, almost before she knew what she wanted, she began to feel that the beast must love her very dearly, and she was very sorry to see how sad he looked at her every night when she said no to his offer of marriage. One day, she saw in her mirror that her father was ill, so that night she said to the beast, "Dear beast, you are so good to me. Will you let me go home to see my father? He's ill, and he thinks that I'm dead. Do let me go and cheer him up, and I will promise faithfully to return to you." "Very well," said the beast kindly, "but don't stay away for more than a week, for if you do, I shall die of grief because I love you so dearly." "How shall I reach home?" said Beauty. "I do not know the way." Then the beast gave her a ring and told her to put it on her finger. When she went to bed, turn the ruby toward the palm of her hand, and then she would wake up in her father's cottage. When she wanted to come back, she was to do the same thing. So in the morning, when she awoke, she found herself in her father's house, and the old man was beside himself with joy to see her safe and sound. But her sisters did not welcome her very kindly, and when they heard how kind the beast was to her, they envied her good luck in living in a beautiful palace whilst they had to be content with a cottage. "I wish we had gone," said Marigold. "Beauty always gets the best of everything." "Tell us about your grand palace," said Dresselinda, "and what you do, and how you spend your time." So, Beauty, thinking it would amuse them to hear, told them, and their envy increased day by day. At last, Dresselinda said to Marigold, "She has promised to return in a week. If we could only make her forget the day, the beast might be angry and kill her, and then there would be a chance for us." So, on the day before she ought to have gone back, they put some poppy juice in a cup of wine which they gave to her, and this made her so sleepy that she slept for 2 whole days and 2 whole nights, and at the end of that time her sleep grew troubled, and she dreamt that she saw the beast lying dead among the roses in the beautiful gardens of his palace, and from this dream she awoke, crying bitterly. Although she did not know that a week and 2 days had gone by since she left the beast, yet after that dream she at once turned the ruby towards her palm, and the next morning there she was, sure enough, in her bed in the beast's palace.
palace. She did not know where his rooms were in the palace, but she felt she could not wait till supper time before seeing him. So she ran hither and thither, calling his name. But the palace was empty, and no one answered her when she called. Then she ran through the gardens, calling his name again and again, but still there was silence. "Oh, what shall I do if I cannot find him?" she said. "I shall never be happy again." Then she remembered her dream and ran to the rose garden, and there, sure enough, beside the basin of the big fountain lay the poor beast, without any sign of life in him. Beauty flung herself on her knees beside him. "Oh, dear beast," she cried, "are you really dead? Alas, alas, then I too will die, for I cannot live without you." Immediately the beast opened his eyes. He sighed and said, "Beauty, will you marry me?" And Beauty, beside herself with joy when she found that he was still alive, answered, "Yes, yes, dear beast, for I love you dearly." At these words, the rough fur dropped to the ground, and in place of the beast stood a handsome prince, dressed in a doublet of white and silver, like one made ready for a wedding. He knelt at Beauty's feet, clasped her hands. "Dear Beauty," he said, "nothing but your love could have disenchanted me. A wicked fairy turned me into a beast and condemned me to remain as one until some fair and good maiden should love me well enough to marry me, in spite of my ugliness and stupidity. Now, dear one, the enchantment is broken. Let us go back to my palace. You will find that all my servants, who too have been enchanted and have waited on you all this time with invisible hands, will now become visible." So they returned to the palace, which by this time was crowded with courtiers, eager to kiss the hands of the prince and his bride. And the prince whispered to one of his attendants, who went out, and in very little time came back with Beauty's father and sisters. The sisters were condemned to be changed into statues and to stand at the right and the left of the palace gates until their hearts could be softened and they should be sorry for their unkindness to their sister. But Beauty, happily married to her prince, went secretly to the statues every day and wept over them. And by her tears, their stony hearts were softened, and they were changed into flesh and blood again. And they were good and kind for the rest of their lives. And so, Beauty and the Beast, who was a beast no more, but a handsome prince, lived happily ever after. And indeed, I believe they are living happily still in the beautiful land where dreams really do come true. And with that, I'm going to conclude tonight's reading of the fairy stories. I hope you had a really good time. I had a wonderful time reading it to you. Thank you everybody that became a fan, everybody that joined the chat. Make sure that you hit that follow button, please, on my Twitch account, How To Heather. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, How To Heather, where your comments will be featured. I love you guys, and hopefully I'll see you again really, really soon.